Yeah, it's time to bench Davis Mills. I think I phrased this as a question, but it's time. It's flat out time to bench Davis Mills, and it's almost as much to help Davis Mills out this at this point as it is to help the team out. And I know many of you are nervous about the Texans potentially losing their draft order. I will address that. First though, I think it's important to just point out how bad it's been because sometimes when you've been in this morass that we've been in with the Texans, it's easy to forget just how good it can be elsewhere. Sure, we see these other teams that are good teams from week to week. We're about to see some really good teams, and the Dolphins, for instance, and the Kansas City Chiefs, for instance. But even when the Texans face these other teams, they're not necessarily getting the full wide open throttle effort from these teams. It's not that guys are, not trying hard or anything. It's that the game plans by these teams have been very conservative because they feel like they can run against the Texans. The Texans defense is going to bend but don't break, so they don't go they don't try to take deep shots downfield. They just kind of methodically go about their business and beat the Texans. So it's sometimes you get lulled into this sense that, well, hey, look, Davis Mills almost threw for 300 yards, or a couple times he has thrown for over 300 yards. Maybe it's not that bad. It's bad. They're 32nd in total offense, 31st in total points scored, 31st in offensive plays run. The best it gets on any of these rankings, just from this one article that I had seen, was 27th in passing yards. They are 26th in total turnovers, but mind you, that's with 11 interceptions by Davis Mills. That's 31st in interceptions thrown. So the Texans running backs, to their credit, and Davis Mills also, hasn't turned the ball over by fumbles a lot. They're probably doing their hand strength drills that Jack Easterby had laid out as one of the sub programs or something. But more than anything, there's just been this unwillingness to just pull the trigger and be aggressive downfield. And some of that you could attribute to play calling, and I'm going to address that as well. But a lot of it is there are times when the reads are simply there to be read, and either throws are misfired in the shorter intermediate range, or Davis Mills just doesn't pull the trigger on plays downfield, even though that's the obvious choice some of the times. This isn't a case of me, watching the TV copy and thinking, oh, wow, that guy looked like it was wide open, but that guy wasn't even supposed to be a part of the progression. There are very, very clear times when Davis Mills has taken the conservative route. People always say to that, well, that's because Lovie Smith or Pep Hamilton are encouraging Davis Mills to be too conservative. I don't buy that. Pep Hamilton, as I've told you guys before, he coached Justin Herbert, he coached Andrew Luck. Neither of those guys seem to struggle with undue conservatism or anything like that. It makes it tougher, too, because Davis Mills is actually good at throwing the ball downfield. He actually has been successful when he chooses to do it. Sometimes that's against softer defenses in the second half, but there really hasn't been that much genuine garbage time because the Texans have managed to keep a lot of these games relatively close. So I don't buy that it's Pep Hamilton that's keeping Davis Mills conservative. I do wonder just how good of an offensive coordinator Pep Hamilton is. He hasn't earned himself that reputation in the NFL of being a guy who can come in and fix an offense. And that's one reason I think it would be really good to get Davis Mills out of there and see what it's like with Kyle Allen. And if Pep Hamilton can, state his case for the coaches or for Nick Caserio or whomever else, I think at this point my gut would be that I want to swap both the quarterback and the offensive coordinator out at the beginning of next year. If the Texans draft the quarterback, which is obviously very, very likely, they sit at number 1 right now in the draft position with a 2-loss cushion. And I think they'll take a quarterback. Davis Mills can still be that guy because, as you guys know, because you've been paying attention, number 1 overall, number 2 overall quarterbacks, they don't always work out. And that's my other answer to people that it would object to replacing Davis Mills because what if Kyle Allen comes in and provides a spark? For one, look, they have the the Dolphins, they have the Chiefs, they have the Titans. I'm missing another formidable opponent coming up, but they've got a rough stretch of games here coming up. I don't think you have to worry about the Texans winning too many games. I do think that both Davis Mills would be served better by getting some time to sit and watch. I think that happened to him last year after his first stint as a starter. He had some time off. He sat, he watched. I think he learned and he grew. And I think that also, I honestly think of the case of Ryan Fitzpatrick, who, when he got benched for Ryan Mallett, of all people, and sat on the sideline and watched, Ryan Fitzpatrick said that he actually understood and learned more about the offense and saw the way it was supposed to be operated. Ryan Mallett had time in that New England system, so he came in and did some things more automatically. Remember, Ryan Mallett came in and was operating with tempo, was pushing the ball down the field, and in a way, he looked actually awesome for a while. It was really something to. It was really something to see. So I think let's see. T.J. Williams said, "Well, this tips QB at 1, right?" Probably. I mean, if they're number 1 overall, then it doesn't really matter because there's probably going to be divisiveness between both C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. So I don't think it matters as much as long as they just don't let anybody know which quarterback they want. And we've seen teams do a really good job of throwing smoke out there. Remember when it was the unanimous opinion, almost reported as fact, that the 49ers were going to take Mac Jones, that they traded up for Mac Jones, that it was 100% going to be Mac Jones. Obviously, it wasn't Mac Jones. So I don't know. I don't worry about them tipping that if they do, in fact, bench Davis Mills. But as far as Davis Mills himself, I think watching Kyle Allen, who's a veteran quarterback, and I don't think he's a threat to become, QB1 or a risk of the Texans not taking a quarterback because of him. But I think watching Kyle Allen operate, and Kyle Allen is a veteran player, can do some things and not make some of the mistakes that Davis Mills has made. But as far as Davis Mills right now, aside from the lack of aggressiveness, look, he stares down his receivers. We know this. He actually gets rid of the ball. If you look at the stats, he's a little bit above average in how quickly he gets rid of the ball. That's a little bit of a fugazi stat because, one, I think sometimes he gets rid of the ball quickly, but he does it too slowly, if that makes sense. He's going to his first read, but he's waiting, and then you get a pick six because he waits forever to pull the trigger, and then he throws an inaccurate ball, and you end up getting a pick six. I think also just if you look at Pro Football Focus keeps this stat, big-time throws, and he only has 11 big-time throws on the season. A lot of his touchdowns have actually come by big-time throws. That's great, but genuinely good quarterbacks are making big-time throws more than just into the end zone, and I actually wonder, now that I think about it, if you think about a pretty high percentage of his big-time throws are touchdown throws, I wonder if that's the one time he feels pretty safe throwing the riskier throw because, A, it's, at worst it's going to be a touchback usually if it's intercepted. B, it's also a little bit easier to see the whole picture there. You don't have as much wide open space. Everything's a little bit more condensed, and he might feel with the safety of the end line and the sidelines that he can jam it in there with a little bit less risk. So that's more of a personality trait that he's going to have to get over. As far as the other objections, I think what you have to remember is it's not just Davis Mills and the final score that's being affected here. The actual players on the field, I think, aren't developing and or are not being evaluated properly because Davis Mills isn't running the offense. I mean, Dameon Pierce alone has a whole lot more pressure on him. And even when teams aren't loading the box to stop the run, because they don't really have to do too much to scheme against the Texans. Even when they're not loading the box against the Texans, it doesn't matter because the focus is still on Dameon Pierce. This is what happens in the NFL. You, as a defense, usually you go into any game and you say something like, well, look, if Davis Mills beats us, then that's on us, and we must have played like crap. Dameon Pierce is the guy we have to worry about. So the psychological focus is on Dameon Pierce and on Dameon Pierce alone. I remember the first year of the Texans where, we had a good defense. We had a lot of veteran players, and we had success against the Jaguars early on. And at that time, Fred Taylor was the big threat on that offense. And our whole psychological focus the entire week was on stopping Fred Taylor. And Fred, I remember the first time I saw him after I had been done playing with the Texans. I went back and I saw him in Jacksonville and at the facility actually. And as soon as he saw me, he said, no, because Gary Walker and I kind of led the charge in that and saying, hey, if we stop Fred Taylor, they're not going to beat us. And we also knew some of the calls. Coughlin had left some of the calls unchanged on the offensive line, which was a bad move because Gary and I were all over the place because we could hear what plays were coming some of the time. So I think developing those players, I think including the offensive line, sometimes if you guys watched the stream that I did with Drew yesterday, sometimes just even in the run plays, the calls are a little bit murky. I think there are miscommunications. A steady helm at quarterback, and maybe that's Kyle Allen, maybe it isn't for the remainder of the season, that can make a big difference in a lot of that pre-snap communication. So I want to see some of these guys play better. I want to see some of the tight ends get better and more accurate targets. I want to see Nico Collins continue to develop. And I think you got to have something better than 32nd in the league at everything to do that. Maybe it doesn't happen with Kyle Allen. There's a really good chance it doesn't improve with Kyle Allen. But I'm much more certain that it's not going to improve with Davis Mills as he is right now. Another reason not to worry about exactly where you pick in the draft. I'm just going to go through. We'll ignore the last couple of years because it's still murky exactly what last year's quarterback class is. But if you start at 2020, let's just take a look at the first quarterback taken versus quarterbacks taken after him. 2020, Joe Burrow. Okay, you're not going to go wrong with Joe Burrow. But Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts. And it's certainly not clear yet who amongst those guys are the best guys in that quarterback's class. 2019, Kyler Murray, number 1 overall. Then Daniel Jones. I mean, if you want to get into that depressing discussion about who's better at this point, yeah, you could. But it's a toss-up in a lot of ways. I think Kyler Murray has upside with a different coach. Cliff Kingsbury's, he's not an NFL coach. He just does not do things offensively that NFL offenses need to do to get the most out of their quarterback or to teach their quarterback. I know that Kyler Murray had the whole thing about not practice or not watching enough film and everything. I think sometimes that's a matter of who's coaching him and what the expectations are. So let's see, 2018, Baker Mayfield, number 1 overall. Sam Darnold after that. And then, lowly Josh Allen at number 7. And then, of course, Josh Rosen, he was miffed that he was taken behind all those guys. But then behind Josh Rosen was Lamar Jackson. So 2018, take a quarterback in the first round. It didn't have to be number 1 overall, certainly. And then, obviously, 2017, Mitch Trubisky, number 1 overall. That wasn't all that criticized at the time. People criticized how much the Bears and how aggressive they were to trade up to get him. But Pat Mahomes and Deshaun Watson after that. Pat Mahomes is Pat Mahomes. Deshaun Watson is on the field an exciting quarterback who the Texans will see in just a little bit. The other couple questions I have that are still swirling around the Davis Mills thing is, one, is it Lovie Smith's decision solely and totally? And Lovie, when asked about it in the press conference, said that everybody would talk, everybody would be able to weigh in. That doesn't really answer whose decision it is ultimately. I think most of us, before Lovie was hired, assumed that Nick Caserio would have final say on a lot of things. Because of the situation and the weirdness that surrounded the hire of Lovie Smith, I'm not so sure that that's exactly how it worked out. And I think that Lovie probably drove a pretty hard bargain when it came to what his privileges were, what his responsibilities were, how much say he had and who played and who didn't. Because he's a savvy guy. I'm not convinced he's the guy for this team long term, certainly, but I think he's pretty savvy about that stuff. He's been through the wars a couple times as an NFL coach. And as far as the other part, too, just as a cautionary tale on the quarterback thing, we're drafting a quarterback. How likely are you to have success? Just as a way of illustration, out of the last 57 quarterbacks taken in the draft, This is an article written. I'm sorry. This was in 2015. So these numbers are a little bit outdated. But as of 2015, at that point, there were 57 quarterbacks taken in the first round in the draft. 3 of them had made an All-Pro at some point in their career. So that's and then it got uglier after that. Remember, there's been some. Remember the stats since Cam Newton, the number of first quarterbacks taken who are still with their team fell off drastically. So it's just not a guaranteed thing. I find myself less and less concerned about specific draft position every year. I think the fact is that the Texans have a really good chance of being a top 3 pick. They have an excellent chance of being a top 5 or top 10 pick, but that top 3 pick is likely somewhere between 25 to, between, actually, I think it's a 50 to 75% chance that they've got a top 5 pick. So you can get some really good players there, whether they be position players or quarterbacks. But I think the Texans probably get the quarterback they want if they want him. And it might be 6 of one, half dozen of the other with C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. And that's where we are. By the time I get off of this and we exit this video, they may have made a decision already. There was speculation this morning that because Brandon Cooks was practicing, and he hardly ever practices on Wednesday, he hasn't all season that I can remember, that might mean something. Sean Bajani did a good job noticing that at practice. And they usually only they don't really let the media watch a whole lot of the practice. They watch the initial stuff, the warm-up drills and everything. But the Sean Bajani's theory was, hey, maybe Brandon Cooks is out there because they need to be sure that Kyle Allen gets as many reps as possible with Brandon Cooks. And then another couple people pointed out that, unfortunately, it could just be a Thanksgiving thing. The Texans might have a really light practice scheduled tomorrow, maybe no practice at all, and that's just the way it worked out. So there's intrigue. There's going to be rumors. If the Texans actually keep this a secret until like Friday or Saturday, as a way to keep Miami a little bit unbalanced and not give them the information, I'm gonna take that as a moral victory. I am all about moral victories this year. If the Texans can keep this a secret until Friday, and they do in fact bench Davis Mills, I will say Nick Caserio GM of the week. That's the reward he gets for coming on my show this morning, taking a shot at me. By the way, he said that it was pretty funny. He said that Kenyon Green has faced a slew of defensive tackles that were much better than me, to which I responded, well, as a 4th-round rookie, I played a lot better as a rookie than Kenyon Green is right now. So what's the explanation for that? And we had a good laugh over it, and away we went. So I hope we get a resolution on this soon. I think it's time to mix it up a little bit. Don't worry, the Texans are still going to draft really high. And